I want to respect people who are coming from a devout perspective, but I also want to hear what the truth is. And then I want to think about how this applies to other situations. For me, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
How can I apply this? And I want to tell you one of the things, Dan, that I take away from this. We have all these ideas in biblical studies, Old Testament and New Testament, that are completely undermined by what happened in Mormonism. And I'll just give you an example. I have no doubt whatsoever that Joseph Smith Jr. wrote the Book of Mormon, that he created it out of his own imagination, and that the Doctrine and Covenants were created out of his own imagination. Yet they sound like they were made by two different authors. One of them is, well, I mean, we started and we didn't get to it before the discussion about what it means, eternal damnation. Eternal damnation on its face in the Book of Mormon means if you don't have the right beliefs and do the right things, you're going to hell for eternity. But then in Doctrine and Covenants, he explains, no, it means you're going to be, or eternal punishment. You're going to be punished by the Eternal One, by God, and eventually end up in some kind of heaven, right? So how could that be the same author? But it is, right?
Yeah,
so when
so soon.
Within a few years, he's within a year even, he's given a different story.
That revelation you just quoted, is given the very month the book comes off the press.
That's amazing. So now when I look at a document and I say, oh, this is a real example, right?
Yeah.
I say, well, how could this have been written by Maimonides in the 12th century? Because Maimonides in his systematic theology says X, Y, Z. And you realize, well, okay, even though he was a systematic theologian, he's also a human being. And in some contexts, he's being systematic, and in other contexts, he's not. And that's really important for historical study of documents, not just the Bible, but for historical philology. We have this tendency, and I know you quote, and I want you to talk about this. There's a concept you talk here about, a certain fallacy. I forget what it's called. That people aren't really consistent.
Right. The idealist fallacy.
The idealist fallacy.
The
so
idealist
we employ
fallacy is that the human, you hold the ideal view of humans, and the ideal view of humans is that they're always consistent. And so you argue, well, Joe Smith couldn't have said that because that contradicts what he said over here. And so you go, therefore, he didn't mean that. He meant something else. And then you try to spin it and try to harmonize. And my position is, well, that's an apologetic position to demand that Joe Smith never contradicted himself. He's always consistent. And to use consistency as the rationale for your very difficult interpretation to accept, therefore, like with Masonry, how could he be anti-Masonic in the Book of Mormon and then join Masonry in Nauvoo? So that's contradiction. So therefore, the Book of Mormon's not anti-Masonic.
Or it wasn't written by Joseph Smith. That's the other option, right?
Yeah,
maybe Sidney Rigdon was anti-Masonic, and he duped Joseph Smith, who actually, because that's one of the claims, that not only is Joseph Smith a Mason, but he came from a Masonic family, right? Isn't there a whole discussion about that?
His brother, we know, was a Mason.
So if his brother was a Mason, that means by implication maybe he was a Mason. Yeah. How could he be anti-Masonic in the Book of Mormon? And it seems like he is, though. Secret combinations, you argue, refers to Masonry, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like and we didn't really get into the whole Masonry thing. Why was this such a big deal, Freemasonry, in that time period?
1826. There's always been anti-Masons from the very beginning. I mean, when
tell us about Morgan.
When Jefferson ran for president, it was anti-Illuminati, basically the same thing. A French version of Masonry. So there had always been anti-Masons around, but it really took fire when this gentleman named William Morgan, who lived in a town just east of Palmyra. He was going to publish The Secrets of Masonry. And he eventually did after he died, but he was planning on it. The Masons got wind of it, and he got arrested on trumped up kind of charges and put in the Canandaigua jail, which is about 10 miles below Palmyra. And while in the jail, he disappeared from jail. Some Masons in a carriage drove up, yanked him out of the jail, put him in the carriage, and he rode off, and no one ever saw him ever again.
And the assumption is he was murdered by the Masons, right?
That's what everyone assumed, that he had been assassinated.
What do you think happened to him?
Yeah, I think that's what happened to him.
So he got Jeffrey Epstein.
There were trials, but some people that were involved only got light sentences, and so a governmental conspiracy theory started that they got off easy. They didn't have a body, of course, but they got off easy because the judges, the juries, they were all Masons, and they all gave each other a secret handshake or a secret word or sign or whatever, and they all stuck together and protected it, because that's part of the covenant is of Royal Archmasons, especially, is to protect one another no matter what circumstance. Murder and treason not accepted.
And it's my understanding, and someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding in the United Kingdom today you can't be a judge if you're a Freemason.
I don't know.
That's what I've read. I don't know if it's still true.
There was a lot of anti-Masonry there as well.
Yeah. Well, it's also a fear that they're gonna be biased in their judgment of a court case based on that. So on the one hand, it sounds like insane conspiracy theories. Masons are murdering people. I met this guy who was a Mason, and he said, "Look, they're just a bunch of old, nice men who get together and play games." And
yeah, I'm sure.
And that might be true today, but if they're murdering people in the 1800s, then that's a different sort of thing.
Well, that was an isolated instance, they would say, and they would say that maybe the Canandaigua Lodge was, had apostatized from the truth.
So now we've got the idea of rogue Masons, which is that's what essentially Joseph Smith accused the Masons of being rogue against the true ancient, religion or customs, or isn't there something like that?
Well, that would be a Mormon apologist position, or
wasn't there something that
authors? There's a new book. There's a new book out recently that tries to argue Joseph Smith was always a Mason, that from birth his family wanted him to be the restorer of the pure Masonry.
Okay.
Which I don't follow any of this stuff.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So they would argue that because the Mormon temple is somewhat like the Masonic ceremony, or part of it.
And maybe was more so in the 19th century, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so they tried to argue that maybe that Masons are apostate. And Joseph Smith said in Nauvoo after he joined and borrowed their ceremony, Masonry is an apostate Mormon endowment, or an apostate. Okay. They're an apostate priesthood. So it's saying he bought into the notion that Masonic ceremony was handed down from Solomon's temple, and that was the ceremony and part of the ceremony in Solomon's temple that was handed down by the Masons, and he restored it to its pure form.
So this statement of Joseph Smith that you just cited, is this a matter of dispute? Like, would Stoddard accept that Joseph Smith said that, or
about Masonry? Yes, it's.
We don't know what Stoddard would say. What is this something that was said by the enemies of Mormonism, or
it was quoted by Heber C. Kimball.
Okay.
An apostle, Mormon apostle.
Okay.
He recalled it in while he was in Utah, an apostle. Joseph Smith said that Masonry is an apostate endowment, and so did another guy, Benjamin Johnson, had a similar statement. And it's not disputed that Joseph Smith said that Masonry. He's trying to explain that his ceremony that he gave, which is different. It's different than the Masonic ceremony. It's more religious, it's Mormonized. Put it that way. It's a Masonic Masonry Mormonized, and so he was claiming to restore Solomon's Temple ceremony, and restore and purify Masonry at the time of his death.
So wow, that
creates a problem with, and so they would say that there is true Masonry, pure Masonry, and spurious Masonry.
That's what the apologists say, or Joseph Smith basically said.
That's what these new authors I just mentioned.
Okay, and what Joseph Smith was saying is that there was some true ancient ceremony from the time of Solomon that the Masons have corrupted.
No one really actually believes that. No critical person believes that Masonry was handed down from Solomon's Temple.
No, of course not. But Joseph Smith made that claim that that he's just restoring some ancient custom that they've corrupted.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the apologists want to say, oh, well, he didn't learn that in Nauvoo. He knew that from the time he was, I don't know, a child or something. Is that what they're trying to argue?
And the apologists would not argue that. That's a new interpretation that's going around on the internet now.
Right.
It's a book written about Joseph Smith and Masonry. They try to harmonize how Joseph Smith could join the Masons and be an anti-Mason in the Book of Mormon. And I say he's still an anti-Mason in Nauvoo because they're apostates.
So they're committing the idealist fallacy. They're committing the idealist fallacy, which frankly is something that, and I'm speaking here coming from philological studies, it's something people are doing all the time in my field, and they're doing it about things where they have no vested interest in their ideology or theology, right? Like I said, it could be something about what Maimonides or Saadia Gaon wrote in the Middle Ages, and you say, well, Saadia couldn't have written that, because he wrote the opposite somewhere else, or maybe he contradicted himself.
I mean, it's something to point out. This is a problem, but you can't put too much stock in that kind of argument, because humans contradict themselves.
It's kind of the bread and butter of some fields of historical philological studies. So, and for me, the takeaway from early Mormon history, what my whole interest in this really is developed into, is we got to be really careful making the types of arguments we've been making, because we have this case of early Mormonism where there are these evolutions of ideas within, like you said, the same month the book came out, he's saying the opposite in what later becomes Doctrine and Covenants.
The thing about that revelation is that the revelation itself says to not publish it, to keep it secret, and not to let people know that it's around contradicting the Book of Mormon. So if that's one of the reasons David Whitmer and others didn't want it published, because it said not to publish it. So and the reason for that is the revelation itself gives the reason for not letting it out. Because
let's go back to explain to people what we're talking about, because that was an hour ago we talked about that.
The Book of Mormon is anti-universalist. It's against those who shall in the last days preach, I shall be beaten with a few stripes, but at last I shall enter into the kingdom of God, kind of a thing. That it's okay to sin, that all shall be forgiven, that kind of a thing. And there was a sect in the Book of Mormon time period, supposedly, called the Order of Nehor, who were universalists that the prophets pound on all the time. So, and then it predicts in the last days there'll be the same kind of people believing that you shall be saved no matter what you do. But the problem that the Book of Mormon worried about was that if you have that, no one will ever obey the commandments. There's no incentive to obey.
So you need the fear of hell, eternal hell, in order to be a good person, basically.
Yeah. So, So Martin Harris is a universalist, and he believes in universal salvation. And it might be one reason he was starting to hesitate here for a second. So the revelation explains, and the revelation is given to Martin Harris, telling him not to covet his own property and to give it for the publication of the Book of Mormon. Not to hold it. So before it says that, it said
spoken like a true socialist. Don't covet your own property.
Yeah.
Go on.
So it's told Martin Harris that it has been said in olden times that you should that eternal damnation and everlasting damnation, endless damnation, and it says that but it doesn't say that there shall be no end to that punishment. Which
the word eternal would imply that.
Well, then it says, "For eternal is my name." So eternal punishment is just saying God's punishment. It doesn't mean forever. It means the eternal, everlasting part is God. It's a noun. Okay?
Yeah. So it's
a noun. God, eternal. God's name is eternal.
Right.
So it's God's punishment, but it's not eternal in the sense of duration. So
so is the phrase he's referring to, eternal punishment? Help me out. That's in the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, you should be able to find it. Eternal, everlasting. I don't know if the two words.
So, and he's all right. The Book of Jacob 7:18. And he spake plainly unto them that he had been deceived by the power of the devil, and he spake of hell and of eternity and of eternal punishment. And I'm not sure what the context. Let's see. Okay.
It also uses language of the Book of Revelation of the is the quake, the lake of fire, and shall be everlasting and things like that.
Okay, so what's so interesting to me about this is that the Book of Mormon is making sort of a big deal about how there's this heresy that needs to be combated, and it will appear in the last days. Meaning, it's Joseph Smith projecting about let's be concerned about these universalists, and yet when he has this revelation for Martin Harris, he's interpreting his own book in a way that's completely far-fetched. Yet he's the author of both the book and the interpretation, obviously.
The Revelation explains that.
Right.
That this language has been used so that it may work upon the hearts of the children of men.
Mm-hmm.
And not to let the revelation be known, not to publish the revelation.
Yeah.
As the people need milk and not meat. And that they shall use it as an excuse and to their own punishment, their own damnation. So, in other words, what it's saying is that God uses misleading language on purpose. Mm-hmm. On purpose. Isn't it? Book of Mormon doesn't mean eternal damnation. It's using misleading language in order to deceive his children into obeying his commandments so that they'll be saved. Which they'll be saved anyway, but they'll be saved from a temporary hell. And the Revelation itself describes this temporary punishment. Even though it's temporary, it's something you want to avoid because it is so painful that it caused even God, it says, Jesus, God, Jesus, to tremble and to bleed at every pore. In the Garden of Gethsemane, right?
This reminds me of a scene in The Sopranos, where they're talking about purgatory, and the one guy says, "Oh, there's no, I'm not going to go to hell. I gave all this money to the church." And he said, "I figure I'll do 6,000 years. I could do that time standing on my head." Right? so he's okay being this like degenerate, murdering criminal because he thinks, "Oh, I'm not going to go to hell forever. It's just purgatory." I mean, they're Catholic, of course. Yeah. And so Joseph Smith is explaining in this revelation, let people think it's eternal hellfire, or they might think it's okay to sin.
Right.
And he's attributing that to God. And so my point is that it sounds like a far-fetched interpretation of what's in the Book of Mormon, yet
Yes,
Joseph
it is.
Smith is the author of both the Book of Mormon and the Revelation.
Yeah.
So, meaning I think he made them both up, in which case it really raises some issues, with, like I said, of historical philology. When you see a far-fetched interpretation, we would call this a drosh in Judaism. Here's an example where the drosh is the pshat, is the plain meaning, is the original intention of the author, that is to say, right? Unless he's just telling Martin Harris what he wants to hear, and then Joseph Smith really maybe does believe what's in the Book of Mormon about eternal punishment, but he doesn't want to lose Martin Harris or his money. Right now, I'm attributing motivations that I don't have evidence for. Right?
Well, the setting given to Martin Harris rather than somebody else, and the Revelation also talks about using his money to publish.
Don't covet your own money. Yeah.
Not hold on to his farm. I mean, the situation is it implies very strongly that he's saying words that Martin Harris wants to hear. But
what does Joseph Smith believe? That's the question.
What